Hey folks, how's it going? This is Ryan Velasquez, and you're listening to the Front Row Podcast on FrontRowReservation.com on Tuesday, January 12th, 2016. How's it going? How's it going? Hope you were able to catch episode one that I recorded yesterday. If you didn't, you can go back. I've got a link at the bottom of the page if you're viewing this from the website. I basically just broke down wild card weekend in the NFL and previewed last night's game, which, believe it or not, my prediction was not too far off. I was a little off on the score, as far as the number of points that were scored, but it really I was a little surprised. I generally botch any sort of predictions, no matter what sport it is, and so yeah. A little surprising there. But today, obviously, the topic of conversation on everybody's mind is what we saw last night. Alabama winning their fourth national championship since 2009. Four for Nick Saban at Alabama. That's five for his coaching career. But it was a good one. It was a good one. This was definitely the best, the closest matchup out of all the championships Bama's won under Saban. I really at halftime, I tweeted out during halftime that it felt like it was going Clemson's way. Clemson had a little bit more firepower going on offense. It was key for them to score on those that second and third possessions. Deshaun Watson, good grief. That guy, if he's not the number one pick in 2017, something will have gone horribly wrong. That guy was throwing some darts in the first half in particular. Both of those passes to Renfro were NFL level throws for sure. But yeah, at halftime, in my opinion anyway, it felt like Clemson, the pace was exactly the way they wanted it to be. Scoring early had sort of forced Bama to do some stuff on offense that they didn't particularly feel comfortable doing. Jake Coker looked like a mess in the first half, I thought. So I was a little nervous. Obviously, I was cheering against Clemson, like most of you other Gamecock fans out there. And that's another thing. I'm sick and tired. I knew it was coming, obviously, but just all the Facebook, Twitter, back and forth, the Gamecock fans out there that are ragging on Clemson for losing. Come on, guys. Come on. Your team went 3-9 this year. They went 7-6 last year. You got nothing to say. Got nothing to say. And the Clemson fans that are attacking, saying, well, you don't need to be talking about this, and you should have been cheering for your in-state team. Don't worry about it. Who cares? Who cares? You guys played great. You guys played a great game against the best team in the country, the best coach of all time. You got nothing to worry about. You're going to be number one preseason probably next year. Who cares what the idiot Gamecock fans out there are saying? Don't worry about it. But I mean, it's stupid. I don't understand why it's a thing. But anyway, yeah, it felt like it was going Clemson's direction early on. I thought the tempo was good. Bama's offense was struggling to adjust to not being able to just settle into the running game the way that they like to early on. But I thought it came down to 5 plays from the second quarter on that really were the difference in Bama's favor. Obviously, the onside kick in the second half was probably number one. That's the one that definitely jumps out at you the most. And I'll tell you, it seems like most of the reaction is surprise that someone as conservative and ground and pound as Saban is would take a risk like that in that situation. But when you stop and think about it, it's really not particularly shocking that he would make that call. You're looking at the best college football mind we've ever seen. He's right on par there, I think, with Belichick. Obviously, very similar coaching styles. Two have obviously worked together in the past, but the thing that those two do better than anybody else that they don't get enough credit for is that in the moment, got to go with your gut play call that changes the entire tide of a situation. Belichick doesn't get enough credit for not calling timeout last year before the Malcolm Butler interception. After the Lynch run took it down to the one, they had a timeout. If you go back and listen to that, I believe it was Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth on the call. One of them mentioned they were surprised he wasn't calling timeout there to regroup, get the situation back in order, slow things down. But in hindsight, that was a very calculated move on his part. Put the pressure on Seattle to make a call there. Obviously, that worked out for the Patriots. Definitely had a lot to do with Malcolm Butler jumping the route and making the play. But make no mistake, that was a big part of that situation, and not too different from what Saban decided on last night. The guy's just sharp. The guy just thinks differently than any coach that I've ever seen, and has a feel for those situations more so than anybody else out there. So risky as it was, he knew the way that the momentum was going. He knew the direction it was heading. He knew that the speed of the game, the flow of the game was exactly what Clemson wanted it to be. And if you kick off there, they're probably going to take it back down and score. So even if they don't get it, what's it matter if they get it at their own 25 or if they get it midfield? So you got to give yourself the best chance to win. He did that. Adam Griffith, you talk about a guy who's been involved in a couple of big kicks on completely different levels of the spectrum. Goes from the kick six a couple years ago to the biggest kick that Alabama's ever made in my lifetime anyway. Just a beautiful play, executed perfectly. I'm not sure why Clemson left that side of the field so open, but that was probably number one as far as the plays of the game are concerned. And the one that isn't getting enough attention today, in my opinion, it got a little bit at halftime, but the end of the first half, I don't know how the officials screwed that up with allowing the clock to keep running after Clemson got the first down with about 12 seconds to go, I think it was. Clock keeps ticking. College football, obviously, if you get a first down, the clock stops. For those of you that are not connoisseurs of the sport. But, clock keeps going. Dabo has to burn a timeout, and he's obviously upset with the officials, as he should have been. And I thought that they would go back, have a little on-field conference and correct the problem there, put the time back on the clock and let him keep the timeout. But, has to burn it, and you got to just go ahead and kick it there, which obviously the kick got blocked. But, if they'd stopped the clock, as they should have, Clemson's looking at one more play, get to throw it to the end zone, and, whatever happens, happens. Then you can either burn a timeout if you need to or just go ahead and kick it on the next play. But that ended up being a pretty key moment because if Clemson's able to get any sort of points there, that certainly changes things up going into the second half. So, I felt like that was not quite on the same level as the onside kick, but that made a big difference going into the second half. And then just the big plays that Clemson defense, special teams gave up. Obviously, the kick return, Kenyon Drake, that was a backbreaker. And then the two blown coverages on O.J. Howard, who had done really not much of anything this year. It tied in for Alabama. And I think he put up, 200-odd yards receiving, scored 2 touchdowns, had another long catch that didn't quite go for 6, but put him in position to score late. I don't know. I mean, defensively, the front four was pretty good all night. Secondary, aside from those two blown situations, was pretty good. But yeah, you leave him wide open twice for long touchdowns, and I'm sure that being without Mackenzie Alexander doesn't help things. But geez, Louise, you talk about having to play a perfect game against the best team, hands down, from the last 5-6 years, and you give up two long touchdowns, 50 plus, I believe. You're just sort of asking for it. But if you're a Clemson fan, I don't know how you don't feel encouraged about where things are at right now. Obviously, you want to win that game last night, and you had a chance, and it is what it is. But I'll be amazed if in the preseason polls for next season, if Clemson does not have the number one ranking going into the season. Deshaun Watson, that guy is a rare breed. He took as tough of a shot from that Bama front seven as anybody has all season long, and he was still just dropping passes in like he'd been doing it forever. That guy's a true sophomore. I mean, that guy, some of those passes, both of those touchdowns to Renfro in the first quarter were NFL level throws. That's the type of thing that's going to get him playing on Sundays, and unless something crazy happens, he's going to be the number one pick in 2017 for sure. The way that he was throwing the ball, he reminds me of a Marcus Mariota with a better poise in the pocket. And Mariota's pretty good in the pocket, and played pretty well as a rookie, despite having no offensive line, no weapons in Tennessee. But yeah, if you're a Clemson fan, you got to feel good. I know you're losing a handful of guys on defense. Probably Shaq Lawson, Alexander probably going to be gone. Maybe a couple other guys. But you're getting just about everyone back on offense. I think Leggett's already said that he's coming back at tight end for his last season. I guess Gallman could potentially go, but I would be surprised if he left. I wouldn't imagine his draft stock would be particularly high. Maybe fourth, fifth round type of value right now, but I would imagine that he'd benefit from coming back, and especially if they get a chance to make another title run, which they will, I would imagine he'll be back in the picture. But you lose Lawson and Alexander in all likelihood. You got everybody else back, though, on offense. You got Watson, Scott, Kane. Kane is going to be – that guy's got a really high ceiling at wide receiver. Got a couple other guys, too. I mean, geez Louise. I'm optimistic that the Gamecocks will catch up in recruiting here, hopefully within the next couple of years. But they're going to have their work cut out for them. The level of young talent that the Tigers have at the moment. So yeah, I don't think Clemson fans would be wise to be down and out after that one. You definitely proved to anybody who had any doubts that you certainly deserve to be in that game. I don't know who would have doubted it at this point, but if there was anybody out there, I'm not sure what there is to say. It was the big plays. The big plays were the ones that came back to get you. The blown coverages, special teams. You can't do that against Alabama. Can't do that against a Nick Saban coach team. So, but I would imagine if I was predicting the preseason poll next year, I would wager that Clemson's going to have the number one spot. And Bama, I'm sure, will be right up there again, even though it's amazing. Those guys are going to lose just about everyone from that front seven again, which they seem to do every 1-2 years or so. They just unload a whole group and then just reel in a whole nother one. Those backups are going to just walk right in like all the ones before him have. So I imagine the top five at this point going into next season, if I had to guess, I would probably I'd probably wager Clemson number one, maybe Bama at two, because they're looking at even on offense. They're going to be without. They're going to have another new quarterback, third straight year that they'll have a new quarterback. Well, fourth one, I guess, because McCarron, Blake Sims, Jake Coker. So yeah, this will be their fourth guy in 4 years. You lose Derrick Henry in all likelihood. I don't know if he's announced yet, but I couldn't imagine why he would come back. You get Ridley back. I think they're losing a couple of guys on that offensive line, I believe. But they just rotate those guys in and out. I mean, geez, how many first-round offensive linemen have they had in the last 5, 6, 7 years? So I'm sure they'll be just fine. I'm sure they got another top 5 recruiting class coming in. So yeah, I would wager that they're going to be number 2. From there, number 3, and this is obviously far too early. We don't even know everybody that's going into the draft. There's no way you can make any of these predictions with any sort of serious credibility, even though you're going to see everybody try to. But the rest of the top 5, I'd imagine Baylor will be up there. They're getting their quarterback, whose name escapes me at the moment. He'll be back. I can't remember if he'd be ready week 1. He went down with that injury there about mid-season, but he'll be back at some point. And Art Briles, obviously, that system, he's proven that it doesn't particularly matter who they've got running that offense, that thing's going to work one way or the other. And the Big 12 obviously has a pretty big gap between the good teams and the bad teams, so I would imagine they'll be just fine. So they'll be up there. You got Ohio State's losing a few guys, but they'll have I think J.T. Barrett is eligible to declare for the draft. I don't know why he would. So you're probably looking at him back. Cardell Jones will be gone, so that job will be all JT's if he wants it. Michigan, got to keep an eye on those guys. Jim Harbaugh have another recruiting class coming in, and another year to get these veteran guys that have been around. They looked awful good in the bowl game against Florida. I would imagine they'll want to work on their front 7 a little bit that got smacked around pretty good by Ohio State in the finale, but I would predict that they'll be looking at a top 10, maybe top 5 spot. Stanford, God, I forgot all about Stanford. They'll be in the top 5, I would imagine. You got Christian McCaffrey coming back, and he and Watson will probably be the front runners for the Heisman. I can't think of anybody who you would rank ahead of those two going into next year. Yeah, I would say that that's probably what you're looking at going into next year's top 25, which I'm sure you'll see all kinds of polls, very early polls, in that department over the next couple of days as everybody sort of wraps up the 2015 season. But yeah, I'm going to be writing a column, hopefully posting it tomorrow or Thursday at the latest, just sort of year in review type of wrap-up of the season, just kind of going over everything that we saw. Obviously, a lot of Alabama and Clemson content will be involved there. Yeah, it was a good one. It was nice to see Alabama finally get a challenge in the championship game. It seems like no matter who they wind up playing, they just seem to roll, no pun intended, every single time. They got a pretty good Texas team in 2009. Obviously, that's a different situation probably if Colt McCoy doesn't go down on the first possession of the game, I believe it was. that probably is a little bit more competitive. Even though they came back in the second half, I don't think there was really any doubt about that one. Um, LSU, uh, did they get shut out? Did they shut LSU out in that game? I believe they did. After a really good regular season meeting, LSU won it. I think like 9-6 it was. But then they go into the championship game, and if I recall, in that was in the 2011 season. If I recall, they didn't even cross midfield, but maybe one or two times on offense. Um, so Bama, that was a pretty easy one, and then everybody remembers Notre Dame the following year. Um, wasn't even a contest, as the one AJ McCarron and Barrett Jones got into a shoving match on in the fourth quarter with like 2 minutes to go and like a 30-point lead, and the announcers had to speculate how that was going to affect them going into the off season, even though both guys were leaving. Yeah, that's how dull that game was. You're talking about that in the final couple of minutes of the game. I think Nick Saban losing his mind over a delay a game call or something like that with 2 minutes to go. I mean, geez Louise. And I'm sure we'll hear all kinds of speculation about whether Saban's going to make the jump to the NFL, which we seem to get every single year. Um, and even though that you're either going to get people who are dead set sure that it's going to happen, or people that deny it 100% and think there's no way that he would ever leave what he's built at Alabama. I it just still, no matter what, it just doesn't seem like a clear-cut thing every single year. Every time it comes up, whether it's the Texas job or anything like that, um, I wouldn't be surprised to see him make that move if he feels like it's the right situation. Because even though he's obviously, I think he's already the best of all time in college football. But obviously, if he stays at Bama for another 10 years or so, I don't think there's any question that he'll have that title locked down without a problem. But I just think that the way that his mind works, I mean, guys like that, the Belichicks, the Sabans, the Harbaughs, I think that the challenge is it's hard to shake off the challenge of succeeding in accomplishing another challenge like that, like a Super Bowl. And so I think that that's just one of those things that, because his mind works that way, I don't think we'll ever be able to rule out a return to the NFL in the right situation. Because if you look at that his time with the Dolphins, if they sign Drew Brees instead of Dante Culpepper that '06 offseason, yeah, he probably doesn't ever come back to college. He probably stays and they win at least one title with Drew Brees playing quarterback for him. So I think if the Colts job had opened up, that would have made things interesting. Um, Out of all the jobs right now, I think the only way he goes is if he's got a proven quarterback uh, waiting for him when he gets there. And right now, the only job that you're looking at with that meets that qualification is the Giants. Eli is what, 34? I believe 34, 35. I don't know if that's going to be enough of a pull. Um, but out of all the other jobs, he's not going to take the 49ers job. He's not. He's not going to Tampa Bay, even though I read something that where some guy was predicting him to go there. I don't think so. Even with Jameis Winston, I don't see that happening. Um, Tennessee, he ain't taking that job. He's certainly not going to Cleveland. Um, but don't rule out if the right job comes along in the NFL, I could see him making that move. Probably not this year, but but don't rule that out in the future. I think that'll be worth keeping an eye on. So, but yeah, it was in a pretty entertaining college football season. Aside from watching your alma mater go 3-9, and your coach, your all-time great coach, jump ship in the middle of the season. Aside from that, it was had about everything you could ask for. The final four teams kind of took care of themselves, even though about halfway through there was a scenario where you could have been looking at 13 teams finishing with one loss, which would have just been a nightmare. Um, you had, I thought the two best teams were the two that played last night. It wasn't a fluky situation where somebody got hurt in one of the earlier games and you wound up with an easy mismatch in the title game. I thought that Alabama and Clemson were clearly the two best teams, and when that's the way it works out, I don't know how you can be disappointed. Um, and I think it'll be nice having so many guys, so many of the best players this year back next year. Um, yeah, I already mentioned Watson and McCaffrey, but you got Leonard Fournette coming back at LSU, who yeah, man, it's amazing looking back at the beginning of the season that he could have somehow lost the relevancy that he was carrying. I think halfway through the season, if you had told someone he wasn't going to win the Heisman, they would have looked at you like you were crazy. But yeah, people have forgotten about him a little bit, just with all the Alabama um, headlines late in the season. He'll be back. Nick Chubb will be back healthy, hopefully, for Georgia. Although if he wants to skip out on that USC game in the middle of the season, that'd be fine with me. He can take that day off. No reason to force him back before then if he's not ready. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be great. You're looking at a pretty nice lineup of superstars that'll be back next season. Um, so yeah, I don't think we could have asked for much more out of 2015. It was a fun one. It was good, and it'll be interesting to see how some of these coaching changes, especially in the SEC, play out going into next year. See how quickly some of these new guys can get their programs heading in the direction that they hope to head. I think Miami is probably got the best chance of making the biggest jump next year. I believe we'll see how that recruiting class, the first one for Mark Richt, plays out. I think the Gamecocks are in good shape with Will Muschamp. If you missed my thoughts on that hire a few weeks ago, go back and look through the December archives on the Front Row Reservation homepage, and you should find it pretty easily. I think that was a great move, despite what the consensus has said so far. I think that the Gamecocks got exactly who they needed for that job, and by 2017, I don't think there's any question that they'll be right back in the mix in the East. So yeah, I think yeah, we've got a lot to keep ourselves busy with once recruiting season is over in February. So it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a good off season. So anyway, that about does it for today's episode. Like I said before, if you missed episode 1 that I posted yesterday, Monday, January 11th, I've included a link on the website page. That if you're reading this on the website or listening to this on the website and not just on the YouTube page, I've included a link below for you to go back and listen to what I had to say yesterday. And yeah, that about does it for today's episode of the Front Row Podcast. I don't know if I'll be posting again this week, but like I said yesterday, I'm looking to do 2 shows a week, ideally no fewer than 1. And like I said earlier in the show, I'll be putting together a year in review column for the college football season. Hopefully, have that up on the website by tomorrow afternoon. So keep an eye out on that. But yeah, that does it for today's episode of the Front Row Podcast. Y'all have a good one.